right, hello everyone, and welcome to a special Elections Daily episode. With us today, we have a special for the Almanac of American Politics. Many of you know it, have read it. They have a new edition coming out, and we've got two of the contributors for the Almanac here. Jessica Taylor and Lou Jacobson are joining us to talk about the Almanac, talk about their work on it, uh, some of the stuff that goes into creating it, some of their favorite moments or items in the Almanac, all sorts of stuff. In the YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, we have a discount code in the link. If you want to order it, we'll give you a little bit of a discount off of the Almanac. If you're on Twitter, you can just go to our YouTube page, look at it the same way. Very simple. So with that, I'll just go ahead and let the two introduce themselves. Uh, Jessica, I'll start with you. Um, what do you do? What's your work with the Almanac? Just kind of describe yourself to some of our audience, since I know you might be a new face to some of us who haven't been subscribing for a couple of years.
Sure. Well, my day job is that I am the Senate Governor's Editor at the Political Report, but the Almanac, it was actually my very first job out of college. So it's a big full circle moment for me now that I am one of the senior authors, which it's especially an honor for me that I'm the first woman senior author ever in the book's 50-year history. So I actually was an intern on the Almanac right after I graduated for the 2008 edition. I became the research director for the 2010 edition. And then on the 2020 edition, I was a contributing author. And then for 2022 and 2024, I've now been a senior author. And I write the Senate profiles now. I previously did some House back when, but I do the Senate profiles. And it's just been, like I said, it's just been a full circle moment, because it really, especially being the researcher, you look at so many people. Sue Davis, that was a friend of mine that I worked with at NPR. She's an NPR political reporter now. I worked with Kyle Trigstad, who's now at Pluribus, was at Bloomberg. I think Crystal Lizza was a researcher too, if I'm not mistaken. So I mean, it's like getting a master's in politics. Essentially, you are researching every single congressional district. It was intense. I loved doing it. I learned so much. It really helped jumpstart my career here in DC. And, it's also interesting to me to see how the research has changed in that time period, because when I was a researcher, we were killing a lot of trees. That was Rich Cohen, who is now the editor and one of the chief authors too. He was one of the authors back then with Michael Barone, and Michael Barone, of course, founded it and still contributes and things. But we actually had to physically print out things. We would highlight it. We would make notes. We would put sticky notes on things, and we would have to carry all the paperwork and everything too. Now everything is done virtually. Everything's on Google Docs with hyperlinks and everything. So much more eco-friendly and more up to date probably, and everything too. So it's interesting. It's been interesting sort of seeing that shift. I know I'm personally happy that I don't get a pile of research and it would just, be piled up here in my office.
Oh, definitely. I can imagine. I mean, when I've only known this, I've only been in this field as long as has been an option. The digital virtual stuff. That's all I really know. So
yeah, I was right on the cusp. I hit a little bit of both. So
yep, definitely a bit of a shock if you've been there a long time. And how about Lou? Just to describe yourself to the audience as well.
Sure. So my day job is at PolitiFact. I'm a senior correspondent there at the fact-checking website. So I fact-check Biden and the GOP candidates and everybody. I also do a lot of freelance, particularly on state politics. I'm a senior columnist at Sabato's Crystal Ball at UVA. I also do a lot of state politics articles and handicapping of the governor's races and the state legislatures and so forth for a combination of Sabato's Crystal Ball and U.S. News and World Report. And then for the Almanac, I too, like Jessica, am a senior author. There's a third, Lou Peck, and then there's a bunch of more junior writers who contribute as well. At the Almanac, these days what I do is primarily the state overview chapters, so 50 of those, and then the 50 governors chapters. For this once every 10-year post-redistricting edition, I also helped Rich Cohen, who's the chief author. He wrote, or I should say rewrote, all the congressional districts, and I edited most of them. So I was sort of involved in that process. I go back slightly longer than Jessica, because I'm a bit older. I was first involved in the 2000 edition. as a writer, and then in the 2004 edition. And then I rejoined for the 2016 edition. So this is the fifth straight that I've done, with a total of 7. And it's just one of my favorite assignments. I love. I've part of my shtick in my career has been to like file a story from every state, and I did 48 states between was it 96 and 2002. It took me another 20 years to get a new state, which was Hawaii last year. And I think I'm gonna go. But
such a burden to go there.
I'm sorry.
Such a burden to have to go to Hawaii.
Yeah,
I know.
No one wants to go there. It's just this horrible visit. Just nobody wants to go to Hawaii.
I know the tough problem was making sure that my family, who I traveled with, was okay with me taking a little bit of time off to do a couple interviews with like politicos out there. So a lot of the background that allowed me to write the state overviews and the governor chapters is that I had made trips to all these states at some point, in some cases a while ago. But I've kept up my contacts in all of those areas. And so I have like a sort of 50 state network who I can kind of bounce ideas off of and sort of take their pulse in what's happening locally. And that's been a big help. I think going out to the places in the rest of the country and actually meeting people face to face in person, I think it sort of cements a long-term bond in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So definitely, yeah. Again, really good stuff here. We'll go ahead and get into it. We've talked a little bit, kind of in passing, a little bit as we've introduced you about the history of the Almanac. It's been publishing since 1972, but this is a really important issue. Every 10 years, as anyone who follows Elections Daily or any other election news outlet probably knows, you have redistricting, and this is a very big ordeal, especially for something like the Almanac, which is covering pretty much everything. You're having to do major work. So I guess kind of, talk a little bit about the history, but also some of the changes, the new things in the Almanac this time is mainly redistricting, but all the work that goes into that. You have 435 new congressional districts to work through. Well, not all of them. There's a couple of, single states, but.
You're right. Exactly. Yeah. So as some of your readers may know, Michael Barone was the founder in 1972, and he was involved with it I guess until maybe the mid 2000s, and he still does a nice essay in each of the new editions still to this day. He had a really nice one in the 50th anniversary edition last time, two years ago, and he's got another good one this time. So he's still slightly involved, but he's not writing any of the nuts and bolts chapters on the House members or anything. Rich,
he was still writing the House members when I did it in 2010, and
yeah,
I think that was
he definitely was fairly heavily involved until maybe about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. So Rich Cohen really picked up the slack, particularly after starting the 2016 edition, when there was talk that maybe National Journal, which has been the longtime owner of the rights, was thinking about maybe getting rid of it, and Rich and a colleague, Jim Barnes, kind of rescued it. So Rich, who's now, basically retired, except for the Almanac, spends a lot of time putting stuff together, and he really easily writes the most chapters of anybody. A lot of the House members, some of the senators, and a lot of the just really very challenging numerical kind of grunt work of like putting together charts and tables for it. He does a great job on all of that, and thankfully saves me from having to do any of that. And so Rich is sort of the MVP of this whole thing. Usually, one of the kind of standard sort of procedures that we followed is really, historically not working on the Almanac until the election is over. Rich has broken that pattern a little bit in a really good way. One, he pre-writes a bunch of the, or I think all or most of the freshmen who are likely to win, and basically pre-writes those before the election, because in some cases it's a safe seat. You know who that's going to be the GOP nominee or the Democratic nominee. And so he gets those done ahead of time. In the past, we've sometimes used that as a premium to give to buyers of the book to sort of purchase that separately. So that's one difference. But the big difference this year was that basically Rich and I agreed to start work on all of this redistricting stuff before the election because we knew what the district lines were going to be. And so we spent much of last summer, the summer of 2022, putting together all those districts. And Rich really, he looked at all the maps and like figured out, what portions were given from this district to that district. And then he kind of put together chunks of the chapters that like had to be moved to like other districts. And then when he did that, he also tried to freshen them up a little bit with new, research that we're provided with. And then I edited all of that and added some of my own expertise. And I can tell you about one like particular project in New York, if you like. So all of that is rewritten, and really, I'm not aware of any other reference book or even source that has kind of district descriptions in the new districts. And it's really been kind of the heart and soul of the Almanac in the past. It's not only the members, which are great, all the profiles of the members, but like, getting a sense of a flavor of the districts of each person in Congress is really just a sort of core part of the Almanac historically.
I bet. And, it's honestly probably easier to do that now. Just kind of pre-write some of those districts and candidates now than it would have been 20 years ago. You have a lot more safe districts, a lot more states that we pretty much know all the results beforehand, or for the most part, most of them.
Yeah.
So it's probably a little bit easier now than it was then.
Profiles when I was there, I remember, and this was the 2008 election cycle, and I can still remember and we wrote a lot for both. So we had like extra profiles that never saw the light of day, but I just remember the one district that we did not do was Virginia 5, Tom Perriello. So we were like scrambling on election night 2008 to write about Tom Perriello.
Yeah, and that sort of stuff is becoming less and less common. You have a couple of fluke districts, but this last cycle, there was really probably the biggest surprise would have been Washington 3, and even that one was within the realm of possibility.
Sure.
There's really nothing that just kind of snuck up on everyone and
right.
surprised people.
Yeah, I remember being at National Journal in the 1994 or 96 cycle, and I was charged with getting some of these freshman profiles ready, short things, and there was one person who we missed, which was the challenger to Nancy Johnson, Charlotte Koskoff. In the end, she came close and didn't win. But occasionally these things sneak up on you. I don't think there were too many for Rich to scramble on this time, but I think in the past he has.
Yeah, it's really gotten easier to do. So that's a good approach to take, at least in my opinion.
And also to praise Jessica's work and David Wasserman and Amy Walter at the Cook Report. I mean, they've been pretty on target in terms of the competitive races. It's pretty rare to find anything that's like in the likely category that flips. It's usually
I'm really struggling to think of the last time a truly a district people actually listed as safe flipped.
Was it the Oklahoma one was the closest? Was that a likely? Remember when who was the person, the Democrat who won in 2018?
Kendra Horn.
Yeah, Kendra Horn.
I was thinking it would probably even have to go back to someone like even 2020, some of those South Texas districts that weren't really considered in the realm of possibility. That was just a realignment shift that people didn't notice coming. There's no way to really predict, all of a sudden you're going to have someone going from 70% of the vote to 55% of the vote. Short of that, it's a lot harder to predict these, but we'll go ahead and move on. I think that's a good, redistricting is a big focus of this, but it's not the only thing the Almanac focuses on by any means. Jessica focused in particular on the Senate races, a lot of really interesting contests there. I know you want to talk about like Alabama as one of them, but like there's so many of these interesting profiles now.
Yeah, that's smoky. Too, as he says, you can actually see my almanac stack back there.
Very nice.
He might try to get one out and play with it. Who knows? I did a lot of the senators this year, and a lot of times it's an extension of, because I go from covering the races for Cook, and then I almost immediately right after the election sleep for a week and then go into almanac mode and stuff too. So in a way, it's sort of like these races never leave me, because I did Fetterman, I did Vance, so a lot of it's recapping the races that I've already covered. And sometimes there's a little bit longer of a break in between, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that did just happen. Like, that's still pretty fresh on my mind and stuff too. One that I updated, like Lou said, Rich does a lot of the new member profiles, and for some of the people that were elected in 2020, this was a time, because really when you have a first Almanac profile, especially if you've never held elective office or anything before, it's largely just your bio. So one of the fun things, I really like the profiles like that, because there's the opportunity for a lot of value add there. The process kind of is, to give you kind of a sneak peek behind, we get the profile that was in the last Almanac. We go through, we try to edit some things out if they're older. We're also struggling with word count and page count, which I know Lou's going to talk about later on. So we've got to make some edits and take out some things so that we can add new things, so that every book has a fresh profile and fresh information about every person. So one of the people that I had this year that was just elected in 2020, and then was Tommy Tuberville in Alabama. And as an SEC football fan, did not think that one day I would be writing a profile of Tommy Tuberville as an Alabama senator, but here we are. So I kind of got to recap a little bit more of his career, and, sort of the stumbles he had when he came in, like questioning, the three branches of government, and going through a lot of that. So, some of those were kind of humorous to recap. And, some of them I've had over the years have been more difficult. Like, so I always do the South Carolina and Tennessee senators, because I'm from Tennessee originally. I went to college in South Carolina. And after 2016, so it would have been the 28, well, it's for the 2020 book for after the 2018 election cycle, I pretty much had to like take a scalpel to Lindsey Graham's to like completely redo it after he became a Trump ally and everything. So that was one that was just a lot of red marks and rewriting and adding a lot of things, and after John McCain died and everything. So that was one. I think probably the one that I had to overhaul the most this year actually was Florida Senator Rick Scott, which he wasn't up for re-election, but he was chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, of course, and had a very controversial and rocky tenure as such. So I was not only putting that in, but, his plan that he put out and controversy over that, and then his challenge to Mitch McConnell as leader. So there was just a lot of Rick Scott to update. I think I saved him kind of near the end because I knew that was just going to be a lot. But it was, I also went back to some of the new members. Rich had written some about Fetterman and Vance and everything, but like going back and adding in stuff about those races, which were so unique, of course. I mean, especially the Pennsylvania race. I think there's a whole paragraph dedicated to the crudité mishap. So yeah.
If you want to actually, honestly, we had more of those sorts of surprising races in the Senate. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure anyone actually had Pennsylvania. Certainly not for Fetterman. It looked by the end, I think maybe one. It was, I think, Sabato and our ratings both had it as leans Republican. I think Cook, everyone else kept it at toss up.
We had it in Democrat, and we moved it back. Like there was some poll tightening there, but
it looked like it was going to shift, and then it just turned out that didn't happen.
Democrats were worried. Like like the final polling, I know, like even internally had it down.
It looked like one of those things where everyone had expected the whole cycle it was just going to go this particular way. Fetterman couldn't, that lead's not going to hold. That lead's not going to hold, and then the lead held. In hindsight,
I think the Mastriano candidacy really sort of weighted him down.
That he's certainly given our election head Joe Szymanski a lot of a headache over in Pennsylvania. Just having to talk about Mastriano at all is liable to get a reaction from him. But on the Senate front, certainly someone like a Lindsey Graham, those sorts of once in a generation politicians that are just unusual to write about. I imagine that wasn't just interesting writing about that. Marsha Blackburn is probably one I'd also be interested to see. She's had a very interesting political career coming out of Tennessee. Not a whole lot lately, but just at the start of that is one I probably imagine was pretty interesting to write about, given
she's
how Tennessee
had a lot of telecom,
changed.
Though. She's had a lot working with copyright and singers and different things. And then she had a very interesting path to the Senate, like selling books door to door. And, so she had interesting path that led her to the Senate and everything too. So yeah, hers is interesting. We had Bill Haggerty that was, new before from 2020. So I got to add some more things to him. And then, really, actually, both of the South Carolina senators were interesting this year because I did Tim Scott's too, and that one was before he announced for president, but was clearly testing the waters at that point. You don't raise that much money for a safe seat, and I think we all knew he'd already made some trips to Iowa and different things too. So those were interesting ones. And then I wrote a lot too of the senators that survived races, Cortez Masto. Ron Johnson's always another one and everything. And then Sinema was another one that I had. Had to be pretty rewritten, especially with her switching parties and then previewing the race coming up and everything and going through all.
I imagine if she somehow holds on by a miracle, it will be another interesting entry. If she's still there in a cycle or two, as unlikely as that seems, that would certainly be one of the more interesting political careers in recent memory.
Yeah, Lisa Murkowski was another one I did. I think she was one of the first ones I did because we usually go alphabetically. And she, with her race and then just her impeachment vote and everything. So it was a lot to update from that too.
Definitely. But we'll go back to Lou here a second. There's also in the Almanac, they have that focus on House races, Senate races, but also gubernatorial races. That's something Lou focuses on in the Almanac. And those of you who are following elections know there are a couple of races up this cycle, but there's also plenty of other interesting races that have happened that he's written about as well.
Yeah. So in terms of the Almanac, this past cycle, the one we just wrote about, was a pretty big one because there were a lot of races. The midterm cycle always has a lot of governor's races compared to the presidential cycle. It wasn't quite as big as 2018. I always go back to the stunning midterm election of 2002 for governor's races. That was the one where I think 20 odd governor's races actually switched parties. Either open seats or ousted incumbents. And most of those guys stayed 2 terms. They won a second term. So in 2010, there are a lot of open seats and then a lot of new members, new governors. And then 2018 will be the next 8-year period after those governors served 2 terms. So that was a huge year where we really had, or I really had to write a lot of new governors' profiles from scratch. And so now it's 4 years after that, 2022, and there were some vacancies, open seats. There was only a couple states that actually switched. I guess the 2 open seats in New England that were GOP governors, Charlie Baker and
Hogan.
Yes, Hogan, of course, yes. And then I guess let's see, Nevada and Arizona both flipped. So that's 4, and there were a couple open seats that stayed the same party. So it wasn't too bad a load for like brand new things from scratch. But the other thing that was big in 2022 was all the discussion about election denial. There were a bunch of governor candidates who were very, very heavy into that. Michigan. Nevada, not Nevada, Arizona, and a few other states. And so that was a big theme across a lot of races.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, yes, definitely Pennsylvania. And because I write the governor's chapters and the state overview chapters, I also tried to get into the state overview chapters a bit about the Secretary of State races and the state AG races, because those also were very highly contested, frequently between mainstream Democrats and kind of MAGA Republicans who were election deniers, and so that sort of provided a lot of fodder in 2022. In the last paragraph or so, like kind of long paragraph of all the state overviews, I tried to basically summarize all the key races in that state for that year, and I left some of the details in the governor's races for the governor's chapters, so I didn't do that quite as much. But I wrote about a lot of these, even statewide things, state treasurer, all that kind of thing, because all of these were heavily contested in 2022. And I like to look at sort of the county by county breakdowns of who gained counties, who lost counties compared to the last time they were out, or compared to the Trump Biden results. And usually you could find interesting patterns there.
Hmm. Definitely. And just to go back to not to detour too much, the 2002 ones are really fascinating. People haven't really looked at those. My favorite one I always point to is Maine, where the map is literally reversed from what you expect of Maine today. The Democratic candidate won all the northern counties, and the Republican one won all the southern counties. It's really just a lot of stuff changes over 20 years, and that sort of stuff can get looking at old almanacs and new almanacs, you can find that sort of thing. But it really is an interesting experience.
Yeah.
I'd imagine covering all that stuff across these sorts of periods of time.
Yeah, I've been covering state legislatures and governors for about 20 years now. I mean, in a serious sort of consistent way. So yeah, I've seen a lot of the change.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we'll also go ahead and mention, there was some stuff in this almanac. This is a very, very large edition of the almanac. There was some stuff that actually had to be cut out for the first time due to constraints of spaces, the number of pages you can fit in the book.
Yep.
So, kind of talk about some of what that is there. I know there's some long time stuff that had to be unfortunately trimmed that you're hoping to get out there in some capacity.
Yep. So basically we file, the way it works is we file it to our sort of production people, and they put it into a PDF format, and they say, okay, right now the length is X, and you got to be X minus whatever to actually, for the binding to work and for the amount of paper you've ordered to work. So we first cut, I think it was 80 pages or so, starting from around 2,400, I think, maybe 2,300, I can't remember now. But we first cut about 80, and that was sort of chapter by chapter. We would cut out some of the dead wood, but we didn't touch any sort of major sections as a whole. But then they came back days before it was supposed to be sent off to the printer and said, you got to cut 200 more pages. So that was a major deal, which Rich Cohen fortunately handled most of that. And what we ended up losing, the most notable stuff was the insular territories, which is Guam, Virgin Islands. We did end up keeping DC, but we cut all of that. We've had that forever, and we also cut some of the back of the book stuff, some of the tables. I think for maybe vital statistics of Congress, and we also cut the sections of every state that deal with the presidential race, which that was not as big a deal because those didn't change much in the current edition. In the presidential years, or right after the presidential election, we do update those thoroughly based on kind of what happened in the previous presidential election, but there was a presidential election, so folks can still find that in the previous edition. But our plan, and we don't have the links for this yet, but is on the Almanac website, which is the do you have it in front of you? The Almanac of American Politics.com, I believe.
I think that's it. Here, let me double check. My mouse.
Yeah. So we haven't done it yet, but we're planning to put all the stuff that we cut up there, so free to the public, so that people who do want that information, because it was already there, it was just cut, so it's easy enough to put up online.
It's www.thealmanacofamericanpolitics.com.
Yeah. So hopefully that should be out, around the time that this gets back from the printer, which right now, the latest I heard today is that the soft covers are supposed to be done July 31st. And they'll be ready to ship at that point.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be definitely interested in looking at those territorial entries. That's a subject of interest for mine that I've written about. This is actually one of the more interesting cycles for that. Republicans have a majority of those territories for the first time. If you add DC in, it's an even tie. Mm-hmm. But that has unsurprisingly led to some changes in longtime policy on the ability of territorial delegates to vote in the committee of the whole, which is this obscure issue that nobody cares about other than the two parties whenever they change power.
Right.
But that's just an obscure interest of mine. So I'll be very interested in reading that if that is put out there publicly.
Yeah, and actually, one of the delegates, Stacey Plaskett, has had a pretty high profile.
Yep.
Was she on the January 6th committee, or was she just involved in some of that discussion?
I believe she was one of the impeachment managers.
She was one of the impeachment
That's an impeachment manager.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. So she's had a higher profile than most of the delegates have in the past.
Yeah, really, all of them are interesting figures. Guam had their delegate switch parties for the first, or had a switch in party for the first time since the 90s. Jennifer Gonzalez out of Puerto Rico is very heavy on the statehood front. And all of them are very much focusing more specifically now on their local policies now that they have more influence, because there's this sort of political evenness in the territories to some degree. But they're all interesting figures. But Stacey Plaskett is definitely one that does warrant some attention. She's certainly getting up there in Democratic politics, more so than you would expect a territorial delegate to ever be at. But yeah, well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We'll kind of continue here for a little bit. Just kind of close out on some stuff. But if you have any questions, be sure to submit them to us. You can ask them on our YouTube channel or on Twitter as well. We're keeping a track of the Twitter feed. But yeah, I'll go back to Jessica here. Are there any other interesting things you've noticed, relative to this almanac? Sort of shift, and some maybe more of the Senate stories, but just any other things that are interesting that you experienced while writing for this edition?
I mean, as we were writing, like some of the retirements came down. So this, will be the last book that Debbie Stabenow's in. Mm-hmm. And, she's been there for going back to 2020. So, I think just, very different people coming in, and I did a lot of the senators that are going to be up for re-election this year too. So sort of it's sort of honestly, it's helpful for me again at my day job where I'm like refreshing myself about the senators that I'm going to be covering for the next election cycle. So, we had Jackie Rosen, Rick Scott's up again and different things, and
Joe Manchin.
Yeah. I actually didn't do him. I think Lou Peck did that one. And everything he does, he has special affinity for Manchin. So yeah, but some of them that are definitely going to be interesting. I think, McConnell's up again in 2026, and there's sort of I've done you have John Barrasso and John Thune that could succeed him. So those were kind of interesting ones to watch, and ones that definitely might not fall in line with Trump all the time. Tom Tillis was one I did as well for you there in North Carolina that, kind of veered a little bit from his party after he won re-election and different things too. So he's an interesting one.
Interesting how that works.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did Chuck Grassley too, who's such an institution, and he won again. So had a little bit of a scare there at the end. I never thought it was really real.
Yeah. He didn't get the full Grassley this time. He only got a partial. I think he lost Des Moines, Iowa, the typical ones you would expect, whereas in previous cycles, he managed to win all of the counties.
But he still did the full Grassley. He still went to every county.
Yeah, he still did.
All 91 counties. And sometimes like I did the Hawaii senators, and that makes me like want to go back to Hawaii. So, so yeah, I did a good mix of them. Looking forward to doing more next year, and everything. So, like I said, Sabinow, we've got, Tammy, Baldwin was another one. I mean, when I go from doing her to doing Ron Johnson, it always reminds me, I'm like, are there two more different people that a state could elect?
Yeah, honestly, that used to be more of a thing you would see in previous cycles. Probably Tom Harkin and Chuck Grassley would have been pretty similar in that camp of just two diametrically opposed political philosophies.
Yeah.
These days, though, you don't really see a state with just these two people that just do not agree on virtually anything at all.
I think we're down to 5 now states that have different parties because we did have Pennsylvania, and then once they flipped 2 seats. So.
Yeah, you've got a handful of them, but even those states, generally speaking, like Shelley Moore Capito and Joe Manchin have a pretty good relationship.
Yeah.
A reasonably good relationship as far as all that goes.
I mean, she's a Georgetown justice, but still.
Yeah. But like, as far as like senators go, they're able to work together. Ron Johnson, just in particular, those two are just not on the same wavelength at all.
Yeah.
But Lou, you got anything else to add here before we wrap up?
Yeah. So one thing is I basically to write my 100 chapters between December and about March, I had to average about 6 chapters per week. And then you're done by March, and then the printer closes around May sometimes. So there's that period where you're getting, copy edits done and page proofs done, that you still want to make sure that you're kind of hearing about all the major things that like to add, that they're kind of late breaking. And so we did a lot of that this year. I don't know. It seemed like it was more than in previous years. I don't know if that's a combination of a bunch of states having new trifectas. They passed a lot of legislation, thinking Michigan, Minnesota, and some of the GOP states as well. Even a place like Arkansas, where you're moving from a kind of establishment Republican to a more MAGA Republican governor, and doing a lot of new fresh legislation. So I spent a lot of time on that, and there's always at least one chapter that you kind of dread and put off until the last, because things are going to be changing. So in the previous book, it was Andrew Cuomo. At the time that we were writing the chapters up, he was having his whole scandal. What was he going to resign or not? So I was able to get all that in, but he still was actually in office by the time we had to close out the book and went to the printer. So he was our governor in that chapter, but it did say a lot about the scandal swirling around him. So that was my last chapter to write in the 2022 book. In the 2024 book, it was Ron DeSantis, a combination of will he officially or will he not officially run for governor? For a president. He had such a fruitful legislative 6 months there in early 2023. It seemed like he passed another major bill every week. And so he wanted to get all those in, particularly if he was going to be a major presidential contender. So I made that the last one for the 2024 book, just because we didn't know what was going to happen next with him.
It's almost like he shoved all of the legislation into this little period of time so we could campaign for president later on.
Exactly.
Who knows?
Exactly. The other thing I'll mention is, we don't directly sort of travel for the book, but I try to leverage some of the travel that I do for the other reporting and use that for the book. I was fortunate to have gone to Nashville for a story in U.S. News last August. I ran it in September or so. It was sort of pegged to the whole redistricting there, and so the sort of Nashville versus the rest of the state tensions. And that was fortunate because I was able to write a lot about that in the spring when all the stuff happened about the expulsions of the members and the fights between Nashville and the rest of the state over various policies. And then another thing that I did was in December, I basically hired a tour guide to take me around Brooklyn and Queens. There were a lot of changes in the districts in the outer boroughs. And I'd done this 20 years ago for the Almanac. And obviously things have changed in 20 years. So I had a guy who was an expert on the sort of demographics and the politics of the area. And we went through by foot, by subway, by Uber, by train, and visited, probably 15 different neighborhoods within an 8-hour period. And I got a flavor of all that, which I was then able to do a thorough rewrite of all those chapters. And that's actually coming out. It'll be excerpted in the in Sabato's Crystal Ball in July.
Very nice, very nice. I know for a fact, even something like that, those sorts of boundaries, those can be very contentious. California always has very contentious redistricting committee discussions about these exact boundaries in urban areas. I mean, even on our staff, we have Adam Trencher, one of our editors, is of the very firm opinion that the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side do not belong in the same congressional district. That was a major change that we've seen for the first time in maybe ever, certainly in 100
certainly
years
very
or
long
so.
time.
I mean, for Nashville, the way they split up Nashville and stuff, like, I mean, because I have family that live there, and they were all confused about which congressional district they were in.
It's not along rational lines.
Wrong, if I recall.
What?
I think they actually printed some ballots wrong and gave those out to people to vote.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, like, it's honestly, even the art of gerrymandering, if you want to call it an art, is you have sometimes the nonsensical gerrymanders, and then you have ones that look a little bit cleaner and like follow the city lines a little bit better. The national one certainly falls more into the sloppy lines sort of category, where there can be that confusion. Maryland's probably another one that fell into that category as well. Just before they had their newer map, of course.
Yeah. I remember, I think must have been the 2020 edition I was working on, because I think they'd rejiggered some of the lines in South Carolina, maybe. But like, because we put in what happened at Mother Emanuel in Charleston, and like it was written as though it was in Clyburn's district, when in fact, like by one street over, it was in then Joe Cunningham's district. So.
Yeah, totally different. Greensboro, I know the same way. It was, I mean, the city I live in, Hickory, used to be split briefly during one of the Republican maps, and that was a point of contention. Just a small, relatively small city getting that treatment. It's something that is worth paying attention to. It's good to cover that sort of level of detail. Yeah. But with that,
I was like going on the map and like seeing where Mother Emanuel was, like on the district lines. I was like, oh, it's literally one street over. That's how close it gets.
That's often how it can be.
Yeah. Actually, on my trip through Brooklyn and Queens, I noticed that the line around Citi Field where the Mets play, it goes like around the stadium, and so I forget if it's AOC. Maybe has it in her district, and Grace Meng is like, a baseball's throw away, or vice versa. I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah, those sorts of things are something I just find particularly amusing to look at. But doesn't look like we have any additional questions. So thank you all for watching. You can obviously subscribe, like our channel if you like this content. Be sure to check out Jessica and Lou on Twitter. They do great work at Cook, PolitiFact. A lot of different areas they're working on. If you are interested in the Almanac, I mentioned again, there is a discount offer if you buy from the website. The code is TAAP15CB. You can find it in the YouTube description if you're having trouble listening to that on the podcast form. There, it's a 50% discount on their website for the Almanac, and it's good through August. So that should be after a couple months to look into that. So again, thank you all for watching. Really appreciate your time. Thank you to Jessica and Lou for coming on, sharing your experience with the Almanac and your respective political careers. And we'll see you all next time for our next episode of Elections Daily.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.